metaphors and comparisons. So, for example, when he speaks about the believers, he speaks about the disbelievers. When he speaks about paradise, he speaks about hellfire. So we're going to use that pretty much the same method for today's presentation, using comparisons in order to get the best understanding. So the comparison that we're going to make is between arrogance and humility. So arrogance is one of the worst attributes that any person can have. Allah dislikes arrogance so much so that he will turn away from you and he will prevent you from getting his knowledge and understanding. In the Holy Quran, it says, I shall keep my verses away from those who show arrogance. So that poses the question for me, why arrogance? Out of all the bad attributes that a person can have, why is arrogance amongst the worst? So for me, my answer is in the story of Iblis. Iblis was a creature made of fire, a spirit made of fire, and he was so devout and so pious in his worship to God that he was allowed to be amongst the angels. He was the highest of ranks amongst his creation, so much so that he was elevated to the next rank with the angels. And everything was holy and peaceful until came our forefather, Adam. Allah had created this being that was made weak, that was made forgetful, that was made hasty, that was made of clay. And even the angels posed curiosity to this creation when Allah presented him to the angels. So Allah's response was, I know what you know not. And he commanded them to bow down to Adam. And Iblis's response was, Ana khayrun minhu, I am better than he. So because of his arrogance, it led him to disobey Allah. And Allah's response was, get out. So from this story, you can draw that arrogance is not just a simple character flaw. It's not something that should be boasted about or something that should be taken lightly. An attribute that will diminish you to the lowest rank that you can possibly be to. So you start at the top, at the highest ranks. Being arrogant will take you all the way to the bottom. So the opposite of that would be humility. So Allah says that he augments the honor of one who forgives, and those who display humbleness towards another seeking the pleasure of Allah, Allah exalts him in rank. So the opposite happens. Instead of being shunned, instead of being diminished, instead of becoming lowly, Allah ensures that he augments you. He raises you in ranks. And this is evident in the patterns, for me personally, of who he selects to be his Nabi, who he selects to be his Rasul. He typically chooses from people who are lowly, who are not the richest, may not be educated. They treat people with kindness. And at the end of every story, who ends up the winners in the end? Those who were humble and humbly submitted their will to God. So for attribute number one, most pleasing to Allah, is humility. So based off of what was just presented, my point of reflection for you all is, we can all think of a testimony when we were shown either grace by Allah or by another person. But think of an example when you had to humble yourself and show humility, and think about how often you find yourself doing so. In this reflection, a lot of people will find that they're actually more arrogant than they are humble. So also think about areas of opportunity where you can improve on this in your day-to-day life. So the second comparison is going to be rudeness and a lack of mercy in comparison to forgiveness and kindness. So Allah says the best companions to Allah are the best to their companions, and the best neighbors to Allah are the best to their neighbors. So I'm going to repeat that. The best companions to Allah are the best to their companions, and the best neighbors to Allah are the best to their neighbors. So in order for you to draw nearer to Allah, in order for you to become a neighbor to Allah, a companion to Allah, you have to be mindful of how you treat your own neighbors and how you treat your own companions. So on the note of kindness, there's a few things that I want to mention about what it means to be kind. So firstly, it's the intentions around the kindness. In the Quran, it says, kind words and covering of faults are better than charity followed by injury. So think about when you're being kind, what is your intentions behind it? Are you doing it to brag? Are you doing it to hold it over somebody's head? That's not kindness, that's blackmail. So don't allow your bad intentions to taint your kindness. Also, kindness extends to all living creatures. one act of kindness could quite literally be your golden ticket. In the hadith, there's a story about a man who was thirsty. He was extremely thirsty and he found a well. And he got himself some water. And after he quenched his thirst, he saw a dog come by. And the dog was also thirsty. The dog was panting. He was so thirsty, he was eating moist soil off of the ground in order to get some type of hydration. So that caused the man to reflect. And he said, I'm going to go get this dog some water. And he went back into the well. He took off his leather sock. He filled it with water and he gave that water to the dog. And this one small act of kindness was his golden ticket. Allah granted him Jannah, granted him heaven because of that one good deed. Kindness can be as small as a smile or as big as giving the shirt off your back. But kindness is not just an action, it's also a reaction. When people anger you, do you give them grace? Do you think about your actions? Do you think about how you're going to react? That's also an attribute that's pleasing to Allah, is suppressing your anger and showing people grace. That's also a form of kindness. Allah said, Jannah is granted to those who repress anger and who pardon men. So when you do good things to people, do you remind them of it? When someone comes to you with a problem, are you judgmental? When someone does you wrong, are you actually giving them grace? Those are questions that you should ask yourself in order to judge. Are you actually being kind, or are you only doing it for the action? So the point of reflection for this would be, what are some characteristics that you have that prevent you from being kind? And the last topic that I want to talk about is your relationship with your kith and kin. This resonates a lot with me because I see it going on with so many families. So many people struggle with their relationship with either their siblings or their parents or their children or whatever the case may be. But being able to maintain a good relationship with your kith and kin, being able to overlook flaws, being able to maintain those relationships are one of the attributes that are most pleasing to Allah. So much so that it is a requirement to enter paradise. So to enter paradise, you must worship God, you must give in charity, and you must keep a good relationship with your kith and kin. So to put this into perspective, there's a hadith where the people were asking the prophet, who is the best amongst you? And by amongst you, he was referring to the prophets. And his response was Joseph. So why Joseph? Well, Joseph had a hard life. He was born, his brothers didn't like him, so his brothers threw him in the well, and then somebody found him out of the well. They still didn't care nothing about him, so they sold him. And then the family that he was raised in, they loved him so much they accused him of adultery. And then he went to jail, and he was supposed to get out of jail, and the brother forgot about him. So he just had a very, hard life. But despite that, he had unwavering faith in Allah. And at the end of that story, it gives such a powerful example of forgiveness, because he forgave his brothers for pretty much initiating that hard life. And not only was Joseph forgiven, but also their father, Jacob. Jacob was so crushed by losing his son that he went blind due to the excessive crying. And his sons pretty much told him to get over it. So from that, whether it be siblings, whether it be your mother, whether it be your father, whether it be aunts, uncles, cousins, it's important to note that no one severs the ties of kinship will enter paradise, and the curse of Allah is on those who sever the bond of kinship. So that's challenging, because if it were me, I don't know too many people that, forgive their siblings if they threw them into a well. So think about that in your everyday life. We argue with our parents, we argue with our family members over things that are so minute. And even the bigger things, how are we going to increase our character to be able to obtain that level of forgiveness that Joseph gave to his brothers and that Jacob gave to his sons? So from that, it leads me to my next point of how do we maintain that bond, especially when you have an unstable bond, when it's hard to forgive. How do you maintain that bond? So in Islam, we speak a lot about rights. And I think that the easiest way to maintain that bond throughout the hardship is to simply fulfill your rights. So we speak a lot about rights typically in the case of marriage, but children also have rights. The same way that parents or children have rights to their parents, the parents have the right to their children. So there's many rights that parents have to their children, but the one we're going to focus on today is love and mercy. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "He who does not show mercy to their children will not be shown mercy." In another narration, there's actually a story that I kind of find funny of a Bedouin man that was throwing a fit because the Prophet ﷺ and his people would kiss their sons. And the Prophet cast him a look and said, I cannot put mercy in a heart that does not have mercy. Now, that's nice and all, but I couldn't imagine saying something that was so out of pocket and so displeasing to the Prophet that you catch a side eye. Now, that might just be my exaggerated view of the prophets, but I don't too much imagine them, looking people up and down, for saying something that is displeasing. But he did. He did, and the Prophet went even further to say that people that are not merciful to their children, he doesn't want nothing to do with them. So you have to fulfill that right. And from fulfilling your rights of your children, the children have to fulfill the right to you, which is that they honor you, they're kind to you, they care for you in your old age because you cared for them while they were children. You gave them the right of education. You gave them the right of a good upbringing. You as the father fulfilled your right of teaching them the religion. You as the mother fulfilled your right to protect them and to guide them to paradise. And now the children in adulthood will fulfill their rights of continuing the legacy that you left to them. So regardless of what's going on, regardless of where you're at present day, go back to the roots. Go back to your rights. Take a step back and say, despite what happened, how can I continue to fulfill those rights? That way I can get my ticket into paradise. Don't allow pride, don't allow anger, don't allow resentment to keep you away from paradise by not maintaining those bonds with your kith and kin. So my point of reflection here is pretty much, I mentioned it earlier. What changes can you make in your life today to obtain the level of forgiveness that Jacob and Joseph showed to Joseph's brothers? So those are pretty much all of my points today. Just to recap, the most displeasing attributes to Allah is arrogance, rudeness, and a lack of mercy, and severing your ties between your kith and kin. And the most pleasing are humility, kindness, and forgiveness, and of course, maintaining your relationship with your kith and kin. So I hope that, what I said is something that you guys can resonate with. It's something that you can take home and really, like I say, reflect on those think points, and hopefully even spread it to somebody else that may need to hear it. So, well, I guess we'll go into the Q&A now. I would love to hear some of you guys' reflections, what you gained from it, your answer to the specific questions that I had, or any questions that you have for me. Not everybody all at once now. Yes, sir.
I'll tell you one thing. I've just finished reading the surah for Joseph. Mm-hmm. And I named my son Yusuf after Joseph. And that is a beautiful story of Joseph. I really enjoyed the very inspirational how Allah blessed him from the time he was cast into the well till he came to Egypt and was made a wazir and everything, and how Allah blessed him. And then on top of all that, he brought his family.
Exactly.
And so Allah just blessed him from day one. So that was a very inspirational story.
Absolutely. Alhamdulillah.
I have a question. So you spoke about being kind to your kids, so what would you say to those that, are looking to get married, looking to start a family? How can those individuals be the best parents, really perform the most righteous parenthood?
That's a great question. So I think the answer to that is pretty much, what I spoke about earlier of understanding your rights. Before you even get married, you have to ask about the rights to your spouse. So once you fulfill that bond, now you have to ask the questions of, how do I fulfill my rights to my children? How am I going to show them love and mercy? How am I going to bear patience with them when they make mistakes? How am I going to give them the best education? How am I going to keep them safe and maintain the environment that they're in? How how am I going to be able to afford to spend on them? Because that's a right, to your children. You have to spend on them. So I think that understanding those rights and really just taking a step back and looking at your ability to fulfill those rights would be, I would say, the best way to prepare for parenthood. Yes, sir.
So how do you deal with arguments with Muslims?
I actually have a hadith about that.
What is a hadith?
So a hadith is a collection of sayings from the Prophet ﷺ by his companions that was compiled and verified to make sure that they were authentic. And we use that in supplement to the Quran as a guide for our day-to-day life. So the Prophet said, I guarantee a house in Jannah for those who gives up arguing even when he is in the right. I guarantee a house in the middle of Jannah for those who give up lying even for the sake of fun. And I guarantee a house in the highest point of Jannah for one who has good manners. So when it comes to arguing with Muslims, I always like to, of course, that's a great reward, but I just feel like it's a duty as a Muslim to lower myself, lower my wing of humility as best that I can. I try not to become angry. I don't become angry, honestly. I know it's hard to believe, but I just try to bear patience because, aside from your kith and kin, I feel like that the brotherhood and the sisterhood in Islam is also an important tie that we need to maintain. So if it gets to the point where, it's pretty much out of hand, you find yourself, maybe being to that point of disrespecting, a fellow Muslim, just step away, calm the water, step away. If you still can't come to a consensus, then to you be your way and to me mine.
Another question. So you spoke on Iblis, and Iblis is, before he became the devil, Shaitan, he was a jinn. He was made of smokeless fire. And you spoke about how he was arrogant, how he thought he was above Adam. So my understanding is that's really where the stem of racism comes from. With Adam being made from earthly, clay and dust, and Iblis said, I'm made from fire, he's made from these things. So how can we fight racism within Islam and outside of Islam?
So within Islam, I think that reminders is going to be the best way that we can fight it internally. I honestly don't even really like the word fight, so to speak, because at the end of the day, Allah says he's not going to change the condition of man until he changes the condition of themselves. So, with that in mind, we can remind the believers that, their arrogance is pulling them away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if Allah has already sealed their hearts and their hearing, there's nothing that we can do aside from making sure that we keep our character good. So we can continue to remind them, we can continue to bear our patience with them. We can continue to, be humble, make sure that we're not stooping to their levels, making sure that we're not allowing them to be a distraction. But at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. And as far as, racism outside of Islam, I feel like the answer is pretty much the same. We just have to continue to grow our character. There's a saying that says, we can show them better than we can tell them. So if we put in the work to fix the issues in our own community, and, become more humble and work together in our own communities, what does Allah say? He's going to increase your rank. So naturally we're going to grow. Naturally our ranks are going to increase, and, they're going to see that. And that's probably going to, increase their plight away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But, we just need to make sure that we're focusing on ourselves. I feel like that's the best way we can combat it in a sense.
Another question I had, you really spoke a lot about the attribute of kindness, but, at times it's kind of hard to do it. You're just dealing with so many people, and they might just trigger you to the point that you do something that's not so pleasing to God. So how can we be more sincere in our kindness? Really treat people like we want to be treated. How can we really do it?
Honestly, I feel like you have to look into the stories. I think you have to look into the hadith. You have to look into the Quran. And, we're supposed to follow the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but that's not the only example. We have all the other, Nabi and Rasul of Allah. that we can look to for guidance on that. And honestly, it's hard work. And that's kind of where that think point came from of what can you change, or what attributes do you have that prevent you from being kind? And changing yourself, especially, in adulthood, your brain likes habits. So if you've had something that you've done habitually, like you've, habitually been mean, it's going to be hard to change that. But, back to my think point of what attributes do you have that prevent you from being kind? For me personally, for a long time, it was that I had a short temper. I didn't really know patience. I didn't understand that, people were different. People were coming at you where they were at. You had to, meet them where they were at. So reflecting on what is it really that's causing you to be unkind, I feel like it's the first step. And then you have to really put in the work and have a genuine desire to be kind. And, Allah knows your intentions. So, if that's something that you're going to pray for Allah to, increase your sincerity and your kindness and, increase your patience or whatever it may be that's keeping you from being, to be ready to go through it, because he's going to test it. He's going to show you what it is you need to improve. So I would say, putting in that work and really reflecting on yourself would be the best way to become sincere in your kindness. I think he was first. You want to let her go first? Okay.
I'm going to add to what you said, Siddiqah, about pausing and reflect. In the Quran, it tells us that, the truth is always there for those who, reflect. Mm-hmm. So I feel like with the kindness thing, I've had the same problem with the shortness of temper. In fact, I have a dirty mouth, my folks would always tell me. So for me, whenever I tend to lose my temper or get upset with someone, I just think silence is better for me. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, if I'm upset, I'll step away and ponder and take my time. I'd rather not speak than say something that you can't take back, especially because our mouths are so important. This is the mouth we use to say dua, so why would I use that same mouth to curse somebody or be ugly? Then I'd rather just, because that's the first thing I think to do. When you're upset and you're hot and you're heated, you want to act. Yeah. But sometimes it's better not to act. Right. Just, be in solitude and stuff. And I think that helped Prophet Yusuf too when he was going through all that he was going through. A lot of the times he was alone, and all he had was Allah. And I think that reflection makes us think, about our Creator. So I think overall it's good. Even if after the fact you're still upset, okay, I know that Allah is, watching me. So let me watch my own actions too.
I think that's a beautiful reflection. It actually reminds me of something my dad used to say when me and my sister would get into arguments and, we would yell at each other and say hurtful things. He would always say, when you get in that situation, you need to pray that Allah gives you the best construction on what it is that you're about to say. And then, you also touched on, being mindful of your reaction. That in itself is an act of kindness, being mindful of how you react to situations and, understanding that, regardless of how the situation plays out between that person, you have done something that is most pleasing to Allah.
That's a really good point. In some cases, to do nothing, make space for you to have peace and to cultivate the thing that is needed in the moment that you're having a hard time being. Mm-hmm. I think that's fantastic. Just be quiet. So I would kind of lead into my question, the things that we can use to cultivate the certain mindset that we need with the faith or outside the faith. What are certain things that we can use in a moment to help cultivate, or perhaps throughout the day, just being intentional about developing a mindset that'll help us be more of the peace, the kindness, the love when we're triggered to be outside of those things. What can we do to cultivate the things that we actually let lock us back into what's favorable?
I think that you need to set your intentions first of all, and for me personally, I've had to do this in my own life, is think about the situations where you weren't at peace. Think about those situations where you were about to get out of character or you did get out of character. What was the thought process before that happened? Because when it comes to changing how you react to certain things, you have to understand why you had the initial reaction to begin with. That could be, an ignorance. That could be a lack of understanding. It could be impatience. It could be a plethora of things. So I think that if you first of all, give yourself some grace, because you set your intentions to improve. And then you have to take some time and, like I say, reflect on how you felt in those situations. What caused you to react in the way that you did? Was it genuinely that person's fault, or was it something that was internal? And then once you identify those things, you can break them down piece by piece. And, instead of tackling just one issue, all at once. It's not helpful to just say, oh, I'm not kind, or oh, I'm mean, or oh, I'm short-tempered. Because that's a big mountain to overcome. So I think it's more helpful to break it down into smaller pieces and, like I say, just understand in each situation what it was that caused you to react in that way, and then break it down that way and, handle each point at a time.
You also talk about maybe doing nothing, being quiet.
Mm-hmm. That's going to turn into something else, right? It's going to turn into you being able to still engage in that situation in a way that's kind. That's when you see the results. So, taking a step back and reflecting, and then, being quiet, that's not going to be, the act of kindness forever. Eventually, you're going to be able to stop yourself, bring yourself back down to that, center of peace, and then be able to actually respond to that person and still be kind. So, you shouldn't stop at just being silent. You shouldn't stop at, let me hold my tongue. You should follow the example of the prophet and be able to step back and think 5 times and then speak in a way that is kind.
So I got this write down the list of things. So having grace for yourself, setting the right intention, in the right intention in the moment, self-awareness, so you understand you're healing. Right? I'm angry right now. I want to do these things. This is not what I want for myself.
Right.
I know I need to heal from that. That's some growth work I need to do.
And then you got to ask yourself why. Why did I initially react that way to begin with?
That'll help you be more self-aware. Ask yourself. All right, thank you.
I have one closing question, just because we have some non-Muslims in here, might be some online. So just how would you describe who Allah is, and what does that word mean?
What does Allah mean? How would I describe that word? Wait, ask the question one more time.
Yeah, so who is Allah? What does it mean for those that aren't Muslim? And yeah, just an overall description.
So for me personally, the general answer is that he's the one true God. God is the one true God that created all of us, that created creation itself. But for me personally, the name Allah is the compilation of all of his other names. So in Islam, he has 99 names, amongst some being, the most gracious, the most merciful, the provider, the omnipotent. So I think that, for me personally, Allah is just a compilation of all of his attributes, pretty much. Yeah, I think I forgot the other half of your question. I'm sorry. Okay.
All right, let's give her a hand. Great. That was great. Let's give her another hand. That was good. She was like, look, man, I know public speaking. I got this. I do it. Nah, she did that, man. So just some closing notes. So again, this is Al-Ijaba Foundation's What's the Knowledge class. This is going to be a monthly educational experience. So we kicked off last month, and we had, this will be a weekend monthly type of thing. So on a Saturday, we'll have our community service. And then the following day, the Sunday, is the What's the Knowledge class. So it's similar to a talim. A talim is basically a talk where an imam will talk to the audience about, just a topic, but it's more open. He's not the only one talking. So this is like bringing a talim type of element to the city of Birmingham, and want to try to do this, consistently on monthly. So again, this is a 501c3 nonprofit, so I am asking for donations so we can do more work. So please, when you get ready to leave, you have something to spare, either digitally or physically. I am accepting donations today. And just so we can stay in touch, I have a WhatsApp group. So if you don't have WhatsApp, download it. And please sign in at the sign-in table. I can add you to the group chat. And we're just here to do the work. We're here to do the work. And Just again, thank you guys so much for coming out. All right. Thank you.